Welcome back to Monitoring Clinical Trials. My name is Steve Pope, and this week we're going to be talking about investigational product and supplies. And I just want to first start off by saying that investigational product is always going to be referred to as IP, so just kind of get used to that. But as we get started, let's take a look at our purpose, and that comes from ICHE 6. 4.6, section 4.6.1, which is responsibility for investigational product. Accountability at the trial site rests with the investigator/institution. So it's not the responsibility of the CRA, it's not the responsibility of the sponsor, it is the responsibility of the principal investigator to ensure that IP accountability and supply accountability is accurately tracked. Our learning objectives include discuss the importance of IP accountability, cite the IP lifecycle, discuss the Interactive Web Response System or IWRS system. You may see this referred to with other names, but they're essentially the same, and I'll discuss this in a moment. And we're going to describe the principal investigator and site accountability requirements and where we fit in as monitors in that process. So let's talk about the importance of IP accountability. Let's first start by defining what IP is. That's going to be any investigational product that has not been approved that is going to be used in our trial. Now, it can also include any approved products that we're using in our trial, either as comparators or rescue medication, things like that. And you will be on trials where those are included in that. So it's important to understand that investigational product, when the sponsor signs the IND and submits it to the FDA, what they're really doing, one of the components of that IND, is giving them authority via the FDA to ship investigational product across state lines. There are all sorts of regulations associated with shipping approved medicines, and we're not going to get into a whole lot of that here, but it's important that we understand kind of what's necessary in order to get the IP out to the sites initially for them to use. So each kit and dose of IP must be accounted for in a clinical trial. So you may have a kit which might be a bottle or it might be a box. There could be tablets in the bottle. There could be blister packaging that the tablets are contained in. It might be capsules. It could be in liquid form. It could be in any number of forms. So it's important that we understand that not only are we accounting for the kits, but we're also accounting for each dose that is in each of those kits. So the responsibility of the PI includes delegating IP accountability tasks to qualified and trained staff members. Now, in many sites, they're going to have separate pharmacies. So this activity is going to be under the supervision of a licensed pharmacist. But you'll also have pharmacy technicians and other people that are involved in that process as well. Many sites that do not have pharmacies, and this would include a lot of your smaller independent sites, they may keep their IP in a locked room or in a closet someplace that's secure, that only a few people have access to that are working on the study. In many cases, those people are not going to be licensed pharmacists, but they've been suitably trained to where they can dispense the IP and account for it. Another responsibility of the PI is going to be training staff for proper IP storage requirements. So sometimes the IP is going to have specific storage requirements, such as being refrigerated or being stored within certain temperatures. And so it's important that the staff understand what those requirements are. The PI is also going to be involved in training staff on proper dispensing of IP according to the protocol. This might include any preparation that the IP may need before it can be dispensed. You may have, for example, a suspension where you've got two items that need to be combined, and maybe there's a period of time where they've got to sit before they can be dispensed. So all of these are going to be detailed in your protocol. You may also have a pharmacy manual for your trial that discusses a lot of these requirements. And then finally, the PI is going to be responsible for training staff on proper instruction for the subjects on the use of storage and application of IP supplies and checking with those subjects during the trial. This is very important because what's going to happen, the subject is going to come in for their visit and they're probably going to get dosed during the randomization visit, and then they're going to be handed IP for them to take home with them. That they're probably going to be dosed once a day or maybe multiple times during a day or whatever the frequency is. And so they're going to need some training on how to do that. So it's very important that the site spend time with the subjects to help them understand what they need to do and to train them and to make sure they understand how they're supposed to take the IP. So we've talked about what the responsibilities are for the PI, and we're going to come back to that in a moment, and also the site staff. But let's first kind of have a discussion about what the IP life cycle is, how it goes from one stage to the next, and all of that. So I've got an upcoming graphic that will help illustrate that. So this graphic illustrates the different stages that IP goes through during the course of our clinical trial. So if we look in the upper left corner, we have the sponsor. The sponsor is going to be required for manufacturing the IP, and they're going to ensure that it goes through the proper quality control and that it's got the proper packaging. And then once they've done that, then they're going to ship that IP to a depot. So the IP goes to the depot, and what the depot does is they store the drug until it's ready to be shipped to the site. They're also going to integrate that drug in the IWRS system. They're going to store it, ensuring that it's maintained under proper quality requirements, proper temperature requirements, things like that. So that's very important. So when this is shipped, it has to be shipped under certain requirements. So once you get your sites activated and they have their subjects come in and they screen, and then they pass the screening and they're coming back for their randomization visit, then what's going to happen is before that time, the depot is going to ship drug to the site for them to have available to dispense to subjects. So each of those kit IDs are going to have a unique identification code, and we're going to go over that in just a moment. Then the site is going to go into the IWRS system, which you as a monitor will also have access to, and they're going to randomize that subject, and the IWRS system is going to identify which IP kit they should use to dispense to that subject. So they'll have all of it there, they'll grab the one they need, and they'll use it to dispense to the subject. So the responsibility of the sites, once they get that from IWRS, is to account for each kit and account for each dose within that kit. So we're going to use some specific tracking and dispensing forms in order to do that. So they have to complete accountability, and they've got to track the subject assignment and the visit dates as they come in. So once they receive their shipment of drug, they will log that in to the IWRS system. The site will do this, and then it will then show as being available to dispense to a subject. So then once you're coming out for your monitoring visits, you as the monitor are going to verify that accountability. You're also going to prepare and ship any returned or used IP that comes back from the subject, and you're also going to ship back any unused IP at the end of your trial. So there's a number of things that you need to be aware of as you're going through that. And it's important that you do IP accountability at each and every visit, because you can't afford to let that fall behind. And if you discover errors, then it's important to identify those, escalate them, and get them corrected as soon as possible. So I mentioned earlier the importance of the IWRS system, but let's talk about what this system actually does. Now, those of you who have been through my previous course have some familiarity with these because we discussed it in that class. So essentially, IWRS does a number of things. Number one, it tracks all screened and randomized subjects. So what happens when a subject comes in for screening, the site is going to enter that subject into the IWRS system. They're going to receive from the IWRS system a subject ID that will then be connected to that subject as they go throughout the trial. It's also going to assign the subjects to treatment arms according to whatever the randomization scheme is. So, for example, you might have two different arms. One arm is getting a placebo while the other arm is getting the genuine drug. The IWRS system will assign each subject into the appropriate treatment arm based on a randomization scheme that in most cases is going to be blinded to all those involved. The site's not going to be able to know what treatment arm they're in. You as the monitor is not going to be able to know. The PI will not know. In most cases, you'll have a double-blinded study where no one will know except those in charge of the randomization scheme on the statistician team will know who's randomized to what treatment arm. It's also going to store the IP shipment and accountability records. And that's going to come into play in just a moment. It's also going to assign the IP kit IDs to individual subjects. So when subjects come in, the site staff is going to register that visit for the subject in the IWRS system, and then it's going to tell them which kit ID to dispense to that subject. And it's also going to perform tasks according to the pharmacy manual. So we'll get into that here in just a little bit. So the site is going to use the IWRS system to register received IP shipments. They're also going to enter screen subjects, the demographic data, the visit dates, etc. And then they're also going to receive kit IDs to dispense to subjects. One thing they'll also do is, as subjects bring those used kits back, they'll also register those in the IWRS system as having been returned by the subject. Every once in a while, you may have a kit that gets damaged, or maybe it gets lost. And so the site staff is going to have to go into IWRS system and mark that kit as damaged or mark it as lost. And that will very likely result in a new kit being dispensed. They'll also use the system to order additional IP kits and supplies. So as far as the accountability requirements for the PI and for the site, it's important that they keep IWRS up to date and accurate, that they don't lag in recording information, adding information, things like that. We also want to ensure and document the proper IP storage and safeguards, and this should be restricted access to the study staff. So in most cases, many of the sites that you'll go to, as I mentioned earlier, are probably, if they don't have a separate pharmacy, and many of the independent sites will not, then they're going to likely store the IP in a separate room in their clinic. It's going to be locked. It's going to have restricted access. There's going to be refrigerators in there, freezers in there, where IP can be stored if it needs to be frozen or if it needs to be refrigerated. And then they're also going to keep secure or temperature logs for all of the equipment and for the room itself. So one of the things that you're going to need to do is review those temperature logs when you go out to the site during each visit. And your pharmacy manual will discuss, what the various temperature ranges are. If there's an excursion, that needs to be immediately reported to the sponsor so that the sponsor's team can determine whether or not that kit or any of the kits that were on hand need to be quarantined or if they can be released for use. But the sponsor will determine that. So it's important for you to understand that process. And then also they need to record IP dispensing and return information on the IP accountability logs. So you'll go through those and make sure that they're completed accurately and that those logs match the reports that come out of your IWRS system, that there's not any discrepancies. And then finally, the PI and the site are going to ensure correct accountability for each IP dose, not only the kit, but the dose within the kit. So you may have a situation where you've got a bottle of tablets, and that's one kit. It may have 30 tablets in it, or it might have 40, or whatever the number is, however they're segmented. So you want to make sure you account for each kit ID and each individual dose. So what you see here is an example of an IP accountability log that you're likely to see when you go out to the site. So let's take a look at the different components here and kind of explain what they mean. So you've got the header information up here, which I think should be fairly self-explanatory. This needs to be filled out because you're going to have multiple pages of this accountability log. So you've got the name of the principal investigator, you've got the site number, the site address, the protocol name will be on there. And then as you get into the actual table here, you've got a series of rows. So let's go over the headers on each row. So in the first column in this log, you've got the IP information, which is the bottle identification code. Then you've got the IP expiration date. You may or may not see that on these logs. Then in the next column, you see the quantity received at the site and then the initials of the person that received it. Then in the very next column, this will be one you'll see this blank when you first go out there because they're going to enter the subject ID in this column when they dispense that particular kit ID to a subject. And then you're going to see the date it was dispensed, the quantity that was dispensed, and then the initials of the person that dispensed it. So one thing as a monitor that you need to do once you see those initials on there, what do? You go back to your accountability log and you verify that that individual has been properly delegated the task of dispensing IP. If they haven't, then that's a deviation. We need to correct that. They're going to enter the date that the IP was returned. That's when the subject brings it back. So let's say they get this kit at the randomization visit, and then their next visit may be 30 days later. So they bring that kit back. By that point, it might be empty, or it may contain a few doses. So you're going to record, the site is going to record the quantity of the doses returned, and they're going to write it in that cell. You're also going to record the return receipt recording. That's going to be the person's initials who processed the return. And then the final two columns are going to be the date that IP kit was returned to the sponsor, in other words, was shipped back to the sponsor's depot, and then the initials of the person that's either returning the IP to the sponsor or who destroyed it. In most cases, that's going to be you as the monitor. You're going to be the person that identifies that they sent it back to the sponsor. So you have a few reading assignments. This week you have the IMARC Product Accountability and Clinical Trials article, which I think will amplify and augment some of the concepts that I've talked about in this lecture. You'll also have the ASHP guidelines for the management of investigational drug products. And then finally, you'll have study product guidelines and considerations. That's an article. So I want you to take a look at these and read through these documents, because you'll get a better understanding of what IP accountability is all about. And for a lot of times, for many new monitors, this is the one area that they don't have a lot of familiarity with. Many of them are not familiar with IWRS in a lot of cases. They don't always understand, where it fits in and how information goes from that system to another system, and kind of matching up what comes out of the IWRS system with the accountability logs that are maintained at the site. So it's very important that you pay attention to these articles here, because they do amplify a lot of what I've discussed in this lecture. So for your online assignment for this week, what you're going to do is you're going to take an IWRS report for Dr. Doe, which is an Excel spreadsheet, and you're going to compare that against the IP accountability log that the site has entered online. So you'll find both of these files on Moodle. So I want you to pull them up, and let's take a look at what they look like. So first, if you look at the IWRS report for Dr. Doe, this is what you're going to see. So you're going to see the investigator name. His name is going to be in the first column. You'll have the site number. You'll have each kit ID, and then the status of each kit, whether it's currently at the site, whether it's been dispensed, whether it's damaged, or whatever the current status is. And then you'll also have the date that it was received, the date that it was dispensed, the name of the visit that it was dispensed at, and the visit date, and then the subject that it was dispensed to. So you want to compare that to what they have on their IP accountability log, which is going to look like this. So you can see they have filled out their log. A lot of the rows are blank because those kits are still in inventory and they haven't been dispensed to anybody yet. And just so you'll know, there's going to be multiple pages of this log. Make sure you look at the header information. The information where signatures and initials are down at the bottom, that will not be filled out until the very end of the trial, and we're ready to send everything back, and we've closed out the entire accountability. So pull up those two documents. You may want to print them out and just compare them and see what discrepancies you can find in those. And then finally, I'd like for you to respond to the discussion forum with the following question. Why do you think IP accountability in clinical trials is important? So there's no right or wrong answer there, but I want you to indicate that in your discussion forum posting, and then also determine if there's any discrepancies between the spreadsheet and the IP accountability log.